Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Chad Ciadello.
Trump continues to fulfill his promise to blow up Washington with a flurry of very controversial staff picks.
We're going to get the latest from the Washington Post's Leanne Caldwell, and we ask strategist Josh Doss where the Democrats go from here. But first,
The Republican Party has clinched a majority in the US House of Representatives to go with their Senate majority and, of course, control of the White House from January, giving them unified power in Washington for the first time since Trump's first 2 years in office from 2017. Former President Trump returned to the White House yesterday for what was the first time since he left office, facing a second impeachment for inciting a mob to attack the Capitol building and prevent Joe Biden from being recognised as his successor. And one can only wonder at the real thoughts of the two men yesterday as they exchanged pleasantries for the benefit of the cameras.
Well, Mr. President-elect and former President, thank you, Donald, congratulations.
Thank you.
And looking forward to having like we said, smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So,
Good.
Welcome
Thank you
back.
very much. And thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's in many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get.
Yeah, certainly a lot smoother than the transition that Trump denied Biden by falsely claiming he'd won in 2020. And after those few words of welcome, the pair sat for some photos for a few minutes. They took no questions from reporters, and Biden has possibly given all of them a lesson in dignity, which no doubt they will fail to learn, Chaz.
look, I think that the Democrats have a lot bigger problems than whether the handover is nice or not. There's been a lot of postmortems recently wondering about the things that the groups they lost and the groups they didn't do so well in. Actually, if you look carefully, every single problem has one issue in common, and that is they involve working class people. If you're talking about Latinos, they're 80% working class people. If you're talking about the young men, most of them don't go to college. We're talking about working class people. And the Democrats won 44% of the working class vote in this election. Now, why does that matter? The reason why that matters is because the Democrats have never, other than in 2020, won an election in the last 100 years without winning the working class vote. And this time they won 44%. They're not going to bounce back anytime in a hurry with that working class vote because they've been gradually losing the working class vote for about 15 years now. And it's getting to a crisis point. Why do I say it's a crisis point? You might say, well, they could have won that election easily. There was such small margins in the blue wall.
250,000 votes in 3 swing states.
Totally. I'm not talking about the presidency. I'm talking about the Senate. And this is a bigger problem, in my view, than the presidency, because there's still room to manoeuvre with the presidency. In the Senate, they just lost Ohio, they just lost Montana, and they just lost Pennsylvania. Let me tell you the problem here. There are now, because the Democrats don't win the working class vote anymore, there are 24 states they are non-competitive in. We call them the red states. What they really are the working class states. And the Democrats don't compete in states where the working class takes over. And they don't lose by a little bit. They lose by 10 points, 15 points, 20 points. They're not even close. What that means is that the Democrats, that's 48 Senate seats there. The Democrats can't afford to lose more than 2 seats in the rest of America if they want a bare minimum for a Senate majority, 50 seats. So let's go forward. Rather than just worrying about 2026, let's worry about 2028 as well. All right, in the next 2 elections, the Democrats need to win back Susan Collins' seat, which they haven't been able to win for decades. They need to win back Ron Johnson's seat in Wisconsin. The McCormick, Pennsylvania seat that was just won, that's not up in the next 2 elections, so that's going to be there. They need to win back 1 North Carolina seat, and they haven't won a Senate seat in North Carolina forever. They need to win 1 North Carolina seat, and they need to lose no other seat. No Georgia seats, none of the purple state seats, none of the Michigan seats, none of them, in order to get 50 seats in the Senate. If they make one mistake, they're not going to hold the Senate if they win the presidency in 2028. And then they're in a whole world of hurt because it doesn't get better after that because they keep on having to have a perfect record because they're giving up 48 Senate seats from the beginning.
Yeah.
And the Democrats, if they don't make some inroads into the working class vote, they might never hold the Senate for 10 years or 15 years. They might go whole presidencies without holding the Senate. And they won't be able to do anything. They'll be crippled. And that could cripple them as a party going forward. And by the way, if they fix this, they'll fix the presidency issue as well because that will open up more states. But they are on the verge. This has been a problem for a while. They're on the verge of this becoming seriously chronic. And I don't think they know what to do about it, John.
Yeah, and the Democrats were clearly messaging it to the middle class and talking about how, unions make the middle class. We're supporting the unions. A lot of working class voters who are union members still didn't vote for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, even though Biden and Harris appeared on picket lines for the United Auto Workers. Trump was basically advocating scabs. He and his mate Elon Musk. So they were clearly not getting to those people. And yes, this is an intriguing long-term problem for Democrats because gone are the days when even deep red states would elect one Republican senator and one Democrat senator. The partisan sorting is so much greater now than it was even 12 years ago. Back in the days of Barack Obama, he had the likes of Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. Those red state Democrats are now a thing of the past, and the purple states, right now they're in Republican hands. So this is, it's a long-term problem, but they've got short-term problems to look at as well, which we'll talk about a little later in the show too. But the big news this week is that Team Trump is quickly assembling for his second term, and some of them, certainly, they are qualified, they are conventional and broadly politically acceptable. Others, seemingly chosen just to have Democrats in fits of rage, and even some Republicans wondering what the hell is going on in Trump land. For example, Trump has announced his Attorney General will be former Congressman Matt Gaetz. Now, I say former Congressman because Gaetz literally resigned yesterday, and that's a fascinating tale in itself because according to reporting from Axios, the transition team for Trump had been vetting a number of potential Attorney Generals. None of them were Matt Gaetz. The choice of him came out of left field yesterday after he apparently hitched a ride with Trump on his plane to Washington, D.C. for that meeting at the White House, and suddenly Gaetz was the pick. And he has little legal experience, certainly nothing compared to most attorneys general. He's also the subject of this Congressional Ethics Committee investigation. Now, that was looking at the same issues that a federal investigation ultimately did not pursue. But the allegation is that he sex trafficked across state lines an underage girl. And he was involved in not just sex trafficking, but drug taking and boasting about it, and in some cases showing evidence of these crimes to his Senate colleagues, going, "Hey, have a look at this."
House colleagues,
Right. Yeah. So this is all very, very strange. The Ethics Committee was due to vote on whether to release this report today. They postponed that meeting, but Matt Gaetz, it should be said, there's not a lot of love lost. With the possible exception of Ted Cruz, Matt Gaetz would have to be the most loathed individual on Capitol Hill, wouldn't he?
Definitely. I mean, they blame him entirely for all the leadership issues last year. It's
right.
Entirely.
He's the reason Kevin McCarthy got rolled.
Yeah, they blame Matt Gaetz entirely for that. So yeah, he's despised by Republicans. It'll be really interesting to see if he can potentially get the votes. The thing which I find a bit disquieting is Matt Gaetz clearly wanted to have a parachute before this ethics report came out, right? Because he took it. He resigned as soon as he had the parachute, right? He wasn't even considered, according to the reports. He just shows up, chats to Trump, gets the job. This smacks to me like a deal.
Yeah.
Like they made some kind of deal.
For what is the question?
Exactly. That's what I want to know. I'm finding that quite disquieting. And one other thing, people might be wondering, if all these allegations are either true or even some are true, how does this guy get security clearance?
Right.
And this is another issue which I think is a real concern about this appointment process at the moment. The FBI have been asking for, the DOJ, have been asking for people to be submitted for security clearance, and Trump just isn't doing it. And there is a suggestion, we'll see if this is the case, that he's never going to submit them for security clearances. He's just going to deem them clear, which is what he did with Jared Kushner, because Jared Kushner could never get a security clearance. And Trump just said, no, he's fine. I'm the president. I decide who gets a security clearance. And so Matt Gaetz might never actually be vetted. If Trump can get him through the Senate by any method, he may never be vetted for security clearance, even though the guy's the dodgiest guy on earth, which is a real concern. We're getting into some dubious places there.
Yeah, and it is such an odd choice, such a provocative choice, such an unqualified choice, a problematic choice, that it does lead some people to think maybe this is a stalking horse, and that Matt Gaetz is the sort of sacrificial, lamb that gets put out there and knocked back by the Senate, held down, forced out of the process. Maybe he gets some cushy backroom job somewhere, a White House job, perhaps counsellor to the president, something that doesn't require confirmation, because Todd Blanche, the president's attorney who represented him in, I think it was the New York fraud case, Todd Blanche has been announced as the Deputy Attorney General, so he could potentially step up. Also, Matt Whitaker, who was acting Attorney General for a period of time in Trump's first term, but the Senate at that stage said, Matt Whitaker's not qualified, we're not going to confirm him. His name was being bandied about 24 hours before Matt Gaetz was announced. It was going to be Matt Whitaker, not Matt Gaetz. So it will be intriguing to see how this plays out, but it seems so far there's been the most pushback on Capitol Hill to Matt Gaetz because they already know this guy and they kind of already have concluded that he's not fit for office.
Absolutely. And just for those who are wondering how the stalking horse thing works, because this has been done before, this is not the first time that this has been suggested. If there's someone you're trying to get through who's hard to get through, like we'll get to him, RFK, that what you do is you put someone up who's even worse, and that allows the Senate to knock them out, and that puts pressure on the Senate to, since they knocked out one of your nominees, to let the other one through. So that's the theory. We'll see.
Yeah, and there could be a plan B because with, we're about to talk about Marco Rubio becoming Secretary of State, that opens up a vacancy as Senator from Florida. That's Matt Gaetz's home state. Ron DeSantis, the governor, gets to appoint Marco Rubio's replacement in the United States Senate. Matt Gaetz might be saying, I wouldn't mind being a senator. Have a look at these pictures on my phone. We'll see. But look, next out of the clown car this week, former Democratic Congresswoman and presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, who's come a long way since she was a Bernie Sanders supporting representative from Hawaii. Or has she? The woman that Trump wants to be his next Director of National Intelligence, meaning she has oversight of America's 17 intelligence agencies, was described as literally a Russian asset by Hillary Clinton in 2019. And it's not just Hillary. Former Bush administration speechwriter David Frum took to X Twitter yesterday to ask, why not cut out the middlewoman and just name Putin as Director of National Intelligence? To which the former CIA director, General Michael Hayden, replied to Frum, exactly. And certainly Tulsi Gabbard has taken some very pro-Kremlin positions over the years, including blaming the United States for ignoring what she described as Russia's legitimate security concerns over NATO expansion, leading Putin to invade Ukraine. So I don't know whether Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset or not, or whether she is, like a lot of people, just influenced by Russian thinking, not even knowing that she's become something of a puppet. But either way, there, in a conventional sense, there is nothing that qualifies Tulsi Gabbard to be Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah, I don't like Hillary Clinton calling her a Russian asset, and I don't like people throwing that term around lightly. But I think there's real question marks over her judgment, especially with regards to Syria. I think that there's been a number of question marks about her judgment over the years, and the problem is that position, as you say, that exact position, Director of National Intelligence, they do nothing but traffic in judgment.
Right.
Like it's not like health secretary dealing with regulations or something.
Yes.
The DNI, all they do,
they assess intelligence.
Is assess intelligence behind the scenes that we can't see, and we have to trust them. And then they declassify things sometimes that we have to trust them was appropriate to declassify. It's all about trust.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any faith in her judgment, which I think a lot of people don't, then that's not the person you want in a position that's entirely about trust.
And when it's her that is then reporting to the President and the National Security Advisor about what the intelligence is showing, that is a lack of judgment, invites intelligence failures. And we've seen in the not too distant history how failures of reading the intelligence that is there, like before 9/11, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Indeed, failure to read the intelligence before the invasion of Iraq, etc.
Yeah, I would have been much happier. I understand Trump wants to reward a loyalist or whatever. I would have been much happier if he made her Veterans Affairs Secretary or something like that.
Sure.
Because she's got a lot of experience in the military.
Yep.
I'm not saying she can't do anything, but just that role seems particularly poorly suited to her, in my view.
Yeah, well, those first two Trump picks make some of his other appointments, like Fox News host Pete Hegseth as Defence Secretary, or even Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, a couple of entrepreneurs, to be reducing the budget of government, look actually possibly quite reasonable. His choice of certainly very loyal but absolutely not crazy John Radcliffe as CIA director is a relief. And possibly the quite disloyal, given half a chance, Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State looked like a miraculous bit of good judgment to choose Marco. I mean, he's a mainstream Republican who probably reflects a pre-Trump Republican Party in foreign policy terms.
I was very pleasantly surprised by Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, I have to say. I think it's the best that non-MAGA people could ever expect in that position. And in particular, it's going to be interesting, actually, because they also put Michael Waltz as National Security Advisor. Both Rubio and Waltz are kind of old-school Republicans in terms of their foreign affairs views. It's going to be... There's a real chance that as far as foreign affairs goes, and like NATO and these kinds of issues, that it might be Rubio and Waltz versus MAGA before long. Rubio might become their whipping boy. Because, I'm surprised that Trump put him there. It seems like either he's tilting towards to try and comfort old school Republicans, or he's made a mistake for him because these guys aren't, even though they act like they're kind of MAGA, they're not really. And so that will be interesting how that plays out.
Rubio has been grooming Trump for 8 years, but anyone who's been a long-term Trump supporter remembers very well that bit of primary in 2016 when Marco Rubio was going around saying things like this about Donald Trump.
The party of Lincoln and Reagan and the presidency of the United States will never be held by a con artist.
Well, Marco has certainly changed his tune, but then again, JD compared Trump to Hitler in the same year, 2016, and that's all water under the bridge now. But here's the kicker, because former Democratic presidential candidate turned independent turned Trump supporter Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a former environmental lawyer, anti-vaccine campaigner prone to conspiracy theories, he is going to be nominated by Trump to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Let that sink in. Now, Kennedy denies that he is an anti-vaxxer. He just happens to be against pretty much all vaccines that are currently in use because he links some of them to autism. He says no vaccine is safe and effective. He's also talked about imposing an 8-year freeze on the development of new drugs and even a freeze on infectious disease research because he wants to focus instead on chronic diseases, again, some of which he believes are linked to vaccines. He also thinks that they're caused by environmental pollutants, food additives, possibly the condensation from aeroplane exhaust. This is what Kennedy was promising recently as a candidate.
My first week, I'm going to call all the division heads and I'm going to call all the bureau chiefs. And I'm going to say, we're going to give drug development and infectious disease a break, a little bit of a break for about 8 years. And we're going to study chronic disease.
So no infectious diseases research for just a little break of 8 years. Fingers crossed we don't get another pandemic in that time, Chaz. That could have massive implications for the American health system and the health of Americans.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks over this one. I should just say, firstly, while he's personally not a big fan of most of the vaccines on the market, he hasn't said, or he's explicitly said he will not remove vaccines from the market. I'll just play what he said.
I'm not going to take away anybody's vaccines. I've never been an anti-vaccine.
You will not take any vaccine that is currently on the market.
I'm not. If vaccines are working for somebody, I'm not going to take them away. People ought to have a choice, and that choice ought to be informed by the best information. So I'm going to make sure the scientific safety studies and efficacies are out there and people can make individual assessments.
Okay, so he's saying, I'm not going to take vaccines away. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you more information. It's the information I'm concerned about.
It's expecting average consumers to be epidemiologists.
Well,
it's unrealistic.
Yeah, there is that as well. But my major concern with him, and by the way, I think he can do some good. I think that, for instance, he's made a big deal out of trying to take the corporate influence out of the FDA.
Sure.
I think that's a fair thing to try to attack. I think that's reasonable. But the problem is doing that kind of stuff, it's not easy.
Yeah.
Because you need Congress to help you there, and they're captured by the same corporate people that the FDA are. But so he can try, sure, great. But my concern is, as the health secretary, he's going to dispense a lot of information.
Right.
And a lot of his information isn't necessarily the most reliable out there, but he has this certain authority as the health secretary. And the only reason he's there is because so many people have low trust in the government these days, right? That's why they support RFK, that's why they support Trump. Now, he is going to, if he puts out the wrong bit of information, he's going to cause even less trust in the government from the other people who do trust the government. And then you've got even more people not trusting the government, and it becomes a cycle of people not trusting the government, voting for quacks, and then they get bad results, they trust the government even less, and you end up in this spiral. And I'm worried that we're getting into this spiral territory.
And the fundamental problem with that when it comes to vaccines, of course, is vaccines cannot be about individual choice, because if you make an individual choice not to take a vaccine, then you get below herd immunity and everybody is at much greater risk. At some point, you have to not make an individual choice based on what you read or what you heard from this guy Kennedy, who's said, well, autism didn't exist in the 1960s and now everyone's got autism. You have to ask why. Everyone's taking vaccines. I mean, he just asked questions. He asked questions that sow doubt, and that doubt will kill people. There is no doubt about that. So this is reckless and dangerous in my view.
Fair enough. There's two people I wanted to mention very quickly before we move off. First of all, you mentioned Pete Hegseth before. I want to back over him for a second because I think he's been treated unfairly by the press.
You hear Fox News and you think...
Exactly. A lot of people they treat him like he's a meathead because he's a Fox News weekend anchor. Yeah. He's an Ivy League
meathead.
No, he's a substantial person. He went to Princeton. He's got a postgraduate degree from Harvard. He's a serious person, and he had a serious military career as well. He should be taken seriously. I'm not wild on him for two reasons. One is, even though I think he's got some interesting things to say about weaponizing up against China and restructuring the military against China, he's got some interesting thoughts there. I'm concerned, number one, about the fact that I think one of the things he's best known for is by pleading the case of convicted war criminals who shot in cold blood Iraqi citizens to get Trump to pardon them. And he succeeded. And that concerns me because it means that I think he thinks in terms of good guys and bad guys rather than in terms of rules. And the reason why I don't like that is because of the scenario I've been so worried about on this show for the last month, the protester scenario. The Defence Secretary will decide whether the military are going to be deployed against protesters at some point in time during his administration. And if he thinks in terms of good guys and bad guys, if the protesters are bad guys, then they break the rules. Yeah. And I'm worried about that. And the other thing I'm worried about is Trump has been looking for someone to commit a defence purge of generals in the DEI space for some time. I think this is his guy.
Who are the people that truly believe in America first, that truly believe in unleashing our warfighters, that reject every aspect of DEI, not the whole we do diversity, but we're not really, no, we're out of this whole game. We only want lethality and meritocracy. That's it. I mean, mass firings at the general officer. Were you involved in pushing that? Okay, you're fired. Were you involved? And fine, pick 5 or 6 symbolic firings of generals. Well, guess what happens at some level there? The whole incentive structure changes for these, they're politicians wearing camouflage at many levels at that level. They're going to start to return back, I would think, for many of them, to what they really were supposed to be doing in the first place. Oh, the incentive is having more ammo and more training, not more diversity trainings? How about we do that?
So if you think DEI is the biggest problem in the military and it's worth sacrificing an entire generation of generals in order to rip it out, fine, he's your man. But in my case, I'm a little bit concerned about some of the talent being lost and the experience being lost in a purge when America might be on the verge of a war with China in the not too distant future. And I think that this is concerning in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one pattern that we can see here is that Trump is effectively appointing a series of avatars, if not mini-me's, to do Trump-like things in areas that Trump himself is not necessarily personally that invested in, but he believes from what they have said to him or what they have said on Fox News, that they've got a Trump-like way of attacking the structures in each of these areas, whether it's defence or the law or government itself, any number of departments. He's just said, well, here are some people that are going to be very disruptive and do some things and shake things up. Yeah. And so it is going to be a fascinating 4 years ahead, Jazz.
That's democracy, John.
Yep, absolutely. Well, for more on all of this, we're joined by the Washington Post Capitol Hill reporter, Leanne Caldwell. Leanne, thank you for having a fireside chat with us.
Yeah, of course. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So as each of these names has come out this week, Leanne, they've been met with either howls of protest or the occasional sigh of relief. But put together, what picture is starting to form about the next Trump administration?
It's a great question to look at it really holistically. And it is that Trump is really fulfilling a lot of his campaign promises to completely blow up how everything traditionally and normally has been done in Washington. He is choosing people who are willing to work outside the confines of tradition, of how things are supposed to be. I think one of the questions is how far outside of those confines some of these people are going to be willing to go. You look at his appointment, his nomination for Attorney General, Representative Matt Gaetz. He is someone who has literally tried to break the House of Representatives. He was single-handedly responsible for creating a movement to oust the last Republican Speaker of the House. And that is just one major high-profile example of how Matt Gaetz operates. As a Republican senator told me today, he said, Matt Gaetz is a wrecking ball. He not only tries to throw things up in the air, but he's often destructive too. So Matt Gaetz is probably the most extreme, but Donald Trump is really trying to appoint people who are willing to do things completely different.
Leanne, do we have any insight into why Trump picked Matt Gaetz? It's not like anyone was asking for Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General. He's barely qualified. He's not the only loyalist out there. There's plenty of better qualified loyalists, and Matt Gaetz would struggle to get the votes, you'd think. So why would Trump select him?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. There's an ethics investigation from the House of Representatives that is finished up about Matt Gaetz that involves child sex trafficking. That report was expected to come out in the next couple of days. But if Matt Gaetz is no longer in Congress, that report does not have to be released. And so maybe Matt Gaetz was pushing for himself to be appointed so that he could avoid what this ethics report was going to say. There's still a possibility that this ethics report does come out. Maybe it gets leaked, and maybe it comes up in some sort of FBI background check for Matt Gaetz's nomination to be Attorney General. So there's that side. That's why Matt Gaetz might want to be Attorney General. But then there's the other side too. Donald Trump on the campaign trail, he has been demanding, saying that he doesn't trust the FBI. He wants the Department of Justice to investigate and potentially retaliate against his political opponents. He thinks that the Department of Justice is one of the most corrupt government agencies. He thinks that it has been weaponized. And so there's very few people who would probably do what would need to be done, what Donald Trump wants to be done at the Department of Justice. And Matt Gaetz, who operates outside of all sorts of realms of normalcy, might be the person who's actually willing to do it.
So, Leanne, I still don't quite get the dynamic here with Matt Gaetz. He's got this allegedly quite damning ethics report that is out there that could be released anytime. It's basically compromat against him. He, therefore, is seeking to become the chief law officer of the United States. I mean, is there some kind of implied threat in this, that if you cross Matt Gaetz, then he'll sick the Justice Department on you? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. That is actually a possibility that I haven't thought of, and no one has actually brought that up. So I don't know. But, there's 5 Democrats on that committee who are going to want that report to be public. There's 5 Republicans. Half of those 5, 2 to 3, severely dislike Matt Gaetz. And they could very well vote as early as tomorrow to actually release this report. Like I said, they don't like Matt Gaetz. But here's the thing in Trump's Washington is that are these 3 Republicans who severely dislike Matt Gaetz, are they going to go against Trump, who is demanding loyalty and fealty of his Republican Congress because Trump says he has a mandate to do what he wants? So are Republicans going to buck Trump in this way by trying to soil his attorney general nominee? And then when this moves to the Senate, senators are very uncomfortable with this. But again, our Republican senators, even if they don't like Matt Gaetz and they don't think that he should be attorney general, are they going to buck a very powerful president and leader of their party?
Okay, let me throw some names at you, Leanne. Pete Hegseth, Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr. Do you know if any of those nominees either definitely has or definitely does not have the votes for confirmation right now?
Yeah, and I'm going to add another one to that. That's Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence. And the reason I add her is because she had a meeting with Assad of Syria. She is very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin, and she is going to be one of the top people overseeing the intelligence community and intelligence apparatus in the country. Pete Hegseth, you mentioned, RFK Jr., Matt Gaetz. Look, Donald Trump is putting this Republican Senate that has 53 votes. A majority, of course, is 51. So a Republican Senate who has 53 votes in a very, very difficult position. And he knows it. But he is betting that they are unwilling to go against him. Talking to senators on Capitol Hill for the past couple of days, most Republicans are saying that they're going to give all of these nominees a chance, even Matt Gaetz. And so what this sets up is this dynamic between a Republican Senate and a very powerful president. And are these senators who rely on Donald Trump's voters to get elected, are they going to defy him? And I just don't know if that's the case yet. It's not clear.
So we've heard Hillary Clinton, former CIA Director Michael Hayden, both essentially say that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset, basically a spy. So are we really in a situation today where Trump is wanting to appoint as the head of America's 17 intelligence agencies a potential Russian asset?
Well, I am not sure if she is definitively a Russian asset yet. It has not necessarily been proven. I don't know if it ever will be. But this congresswoman, a former congresswoman, who previously a Democrat, she very well could be. I talked to a senator today who is friends with her, and he said that she's a fantastic choice and that she's going to shake things up like all these other nominees. So she absolutely could very well be confirmed. And usually the Senate gives a lot of deference to the president to fill their administration. But usually the Senate is quibbling over, someone's a little bit too far to the left or a little bit too conservative. But we have not seen nominees this far outside of the mainstream before.
Leanne Caldwell, good to talk to you. Thank you for having a fireside chat with us.
Of course, thank you.
So there is a big asterisk next to a lot of these potential appointments, Chaz, because most of them require Senate confirmation.
Yes.
It means they will conduct hearings, they will ask a lot of questions, and then there'll be an up or down vote, and you need 50 votes for Republicans as a minimum to confirm these appointments. Some of them, like Marco Rubio, he'll probably get 70 votes.
Yeah.
Others, like Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, may not get close to 50 votes. And if that's the case, Trump has a workaround. Tell us a bit about the way that could pan out.
Yeah, in the Constitution, originally Congress wasn't sitting all the time like they are now. They only sat 9 months for every 2 years. So they had to have a way of appointing people when Congress wasn't sitting. They're called recess appointments. It's in the Constitution. It's perfectly legitimate. The problem is, over time, those recesses have become shorter and shorter and shorter, but they've still been using those recesses to appoint people. Not because they have an emergency, they need to appoint someone, but because they don't think they can get those people confirmed.
So it's a loophole to get the person the president wants, but the Senate does not want.
That's right. And particularly under Clinton and under George W. Bush, there was a lot of dodging that using recess appointments to just get around the Senate. Then under Obama, Mitch McConnell came up with this workaround himself to stop them doing this, which is to gavel in every 8 or 9 days, because a recess needs to be more than 10 days. Every 8 or 9 days, you just hit the gavel, go, okay, we just had a session, we're gone.
So literally one senator can go to the floor, tap a wooden hammer, the Senate is in session, tap it again, the Senate is in recess, I'm back to Palm Beach.
So therefore there's permanently no recesses.
Right.
So there's no more recess points.
So you need the Senate Majority Leader to agree to that tactic to stop the president shoving someone through.
Exactly. Now, cut to the Senate leadership contest. Now that Mitch McConnell's gone, and Trump tweeted right in the middle of the contest. He tweeted out, "Any Republican senator seeking the coveted leadership position in the United States Senate must agree to recess appointments in the Senate, without which we will not be able to get people confirmed in a timely manner. We need positions filled immediately." And that's interesting. He said, "We need positions filled immediately." Which people took to mean he wants them to hold the recess straight away to get around confirmation entirely.
Right.
In which case the Senate doesn't confirm anyone. They just go take a holiday for 10 days, and Trump then just appoints everyone he wants to all at once and gets them done immediately, and so forth. And Bob's your uncle. You can work around the Senate. Now, Rick Scott, who was going for leadership, said, "Yes, I'll do that, no problems." John Thune, on the other hand, he replied with, "We must act quickly and decisively to get the president's cabinet and other nominees in place as soon as possible to start delivering on the mandate we've been set to execute. And all options are on the table to make that happen, including recess appointments. We cannot let Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats block the will of the American people." Okay, so that's far short of saying yes. And the key there is he's saying we're not going to let the Democrats block. This is all about Republicans.
Right.
Democrats can't block anything.
Yeah.
Because you only
named Chuck Schumer, not Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and probably Bill Cassidy.
Exactly. And so this is on now. John Thune has said to Trump, "Bugger off, I don't care what you think."
Yeah.
Is Trump going to keep on applying pressure to him or not? If he makes John Thune back down, he essentially is invalidating the Senate in I think an unconstitutional way and making the Senate useless. And then he'll get whatever he wants. But will John Thune stand up for the Senate? Can he take the pressure?
Well, John
Thune
Thune is old school. He's certainly an institutionalist. He's likely, you would think, to want to stand up for the powers of the Senate, even if that means that, therefore, we insist on having a hearing for some people, and then perhaps, doing as you would ordinarily do, recommend to the White House they withdraw a nomination because the votes aren't there for it, and that could happen in a couple of cases. But it is important to note, what makes this extraordinary is that there is a 53-seat Republican majority when Obama and Clinton and Bush were all doing this is because they did not have the numbers in the Senate. They could not get their confirmations passed. The other side were refusing to even conduct a proper confirmation process, up to and including Supreme Court justices and so on. That's why there has been this workaround. But Trump is, by doing this, he's kind of further eroding the powers of the Senate, drawing it into the powers of the White House, which is one of the things that people are concerned Trump will seek to do across the board.
Exactly. To override your own party has never been done before. This is completely new.
Yeah, but if you're going to do it, you may as well do it in the first 10 days of your second term, because that's when your power is at its zenith. Yeah. Well, for more on the fallout from last week's election, to go back through what the polls were really saying in retrospect and what could be about to happen next, certainly as Democrats look to rebuild, regroup and seek re-election in 2 and 4 years' time. We're joined by political analyst Joshua Doss. He worked on Democratic campaigns, including Kamala Harris's 2020 presidential run. Josh, welcome back to the Fireside Chat.
Great to see you all. Happy to be back.
So with the benefit of a week and a half's hindsight now, Josh, how well would you say the polls performed generally? Obviously, nationally, they tended to have Kamala Harris in front on average. Is this now a point where we can say, yet again, the Trump vote was missed? There was an underestimation of Trump's support?
Yeah, I mean, I think all in all, the race was not as much of a landslide as maybe folks are saying in the media. I mean, we've seen landslides in America. We've seen folks really run the table. It just wasn't the case this time. She definitely lost all the swing states, but all of the swing states were polling within the margin of error, right? You usually have a 2.5 to 3% margin of error when you're talking about the swing states that we had this year: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And they tipped Trump's direction, which, you know, is very possible when a state is polling within the margin of error. So, you know, I wouldn't say that there was a massive polling error in this election. But yeah, I mean, to your point, there is a shy Trump voter that we know Trump has this effect, mainly because of his rhetoric about mistrust in institutions really resonates with some folks, right? And it makes them less likely. The same things that make them less likely to vote for status quo candidates and more likely to vote for, you know, quote, outsider candidates like Trump also make them less likely to respond to polls, right? Less likely to pick up the phone, less likely to take a survey. And it's just a very, very hard thing that pollsters are trying to account for in the years to come. So
now, elections come and go, but there is a trend beginning to take shape, which is Trump won more votes of colour in 2020 than he did back in 2016. And then he won more voters of colour again this year than he did in 2020. What is driving that now medium-term trend?
You know, I think we look at it sometimes of voters of color. We segment some of, when we talk about politics, we segment it by race. I do it. I think it's important to do sometimes. I don't know how much that actually matters when it comes to a candidate like Donald Trump, who his message is really based in this economic populism, right? This outsider versus the status quo. Even though he has completely captured the Republican Party, he really does tell the story of fighting for the little man to be a check on a system as whole, a system that has, by and large, folks would agree, has failed in the middle and the working class. And the truth is, lessons were learned in this election, that type of message can break past racial lines. It can break into an area of Latino voters who, I think somewhere upwards of 50% of Latino men voted for Donald Trump, despite comments that some would call very racist and derogatory towards Puerto Ricans and Mexicans, right? The economic populism is the number one reason why they still voted for Trump. They're telling us that in surveys, they cared about the economy. They felt Trump was better at the economy. So I think that, those segments of segmenting voters by race is important sometimes, but I think Trump just might be having an effect that kind of breaks across race and class and taps more into people's values on what they see or what they want to see in the country. And I think we saw a little bit of that in this election.
Based on your research, how would you suggest the Democrats should reconsider their approach?
I think the Democrats should revisit their commitment to economic populism and how to tell the story of not just how they're going to fight for the little guy, but who exactly they're fighting against, right? Donald Trump taps into this white economic populism that seeks not just to escape the bounds of its financial woes, it seeks to avenge a little bit, right? And Trump is an expert at telling the story of vengeance. Not just here is the solution for your problems, but here also is your enemy, right? It's the Mexicans that are taking your jobs. It's the immigrants that have what you should have. Now, the truth is, it's easier to fool a man than it is to convince a man that he's been fooled, right? So I'm going to say something that I actually don't say ever, really. I think Trump is right when he talks about the quote unquote enemy within. I think he's just pointing at the wrong enemy. All the data point to large corporations consolidating wealth and gouging the prices of everyday goods as a real explanation for rising prices and inflation and the economic pain that makes them vote against status quo candidates like Kamala Harris, right? But none of that matters if you can't tell the story with a villain. And I think that Democrats maybe need to tell that story about defeating unfettered capitalism and free-range corporatism with a little bit more vigor.
Josh, there's been a lot of talk already as well, of course, about the possible role of sexism as well as racism in Kamala Harris underperforming her polls and expectations. The bottom line is Trump has defeated now 2 female presidential candidates put forward by the Democrats. And when Democrats put forward a male candidate, Trump lost. Does that mean it's inevitable that in 2028, Democrats are going to be thinking, we really don't need to nominate another woman this year?
I certainly assume so. I would be really surprised if Democrats are not now more hesitant to run a woman candidate after going 0 for 2. And not just going 0 for 2, but the loss being to some would call a fascist reactionary like Donald Trump. I do think that it will affect their decision making in the future. I think messengers matter. I think Vice President Harris did an outstanding job. Given the hand that she had in the less than 120 days, she responded to Black voters with an economic plan that I think really shored up that vote that folks were really concerned about. I think she navigated some of what she was handed really well. She touched on her abortion messaging. That was her strongest message. She destroyed Donald Trump in the debates, and she ran a good ground game, right? I really do think that she did a good job. I also think that, there is a case to be made that when you're fighting with a woman candidate, you don't have to just fight the opponent. You have to fight folks inside of your party that exists within an amount of pervasive sexism and misogyny that exists on both sides of the aisle. And maybe it doesn't exist in the depth on the left that it does on the right. But the question when you're talking about winning an election in America is not how much it exists, but where does it exist? And does it exist enough in the swing states that you need to win an election? And I think that that's a strong consideration for Democrats moving forward, yeah.
Now, the Democrats seem to be focusing very much on getting the 270 electoral college votes and not much more. But population trends are changing, Josh. What wins you 270 now is going to win you 250 in 10 years' time. Soon, Democrats are going to need to win in Florida or Texas. Are the people in states like that the same as people everywhere else, or is there something special that Democrats need to do to win in red states?
Ooh, that's a great question. That's an outstanding question. You're absolutely right. And we've seen it just happen in the last 10 years, right? We've seen Ohio and Florida they're not swing states anymore. There was 28 electoral college votes that were always up for grabs every election until they weren't, right? And so it just became so much more important to be laying ground in states. We've also seen states go blue that were, had a history of being red. We've seen Democrats kind of grab Virginia, right? There was some Democratic movement in Colorado as well. So it's absolutely important to be laying the ground game in some of these states. And, I think the Democratic Party was doing some of that work at one point. I'm reminded of a lot of money going to candidates like Stacey Abrams in Georgia when she ran for governor, and Beto O'Rourke in Texas when he was running. And some others that Andrew Gillum in Florida, right? And they had steam and they were popular in their states, and they lost their races. And it has seemed like there's been a little bit of a dud of infrastructure being laid there ever since. But I think you're absolutely right that needs to happen. And I think those voters are a little bit different. But here is something that is actually happening kind of under covers in those states, because those states don't have, a lot of those states are red states and they don't have income tax. Let's take Texas for an example. You have Austin that's popping up as this tech hub, and tech hubs kind of bring these liberal ecosystems of voters and create blue voters, right? So there are some things in these red states that are working in their favor to kind of counteract the conservative ideology that is also growing in those states. But I do think you're absolutely right that it will be incredibly important to not just look at the electoral map of 2028, but thereafter.
Josh Doss, always great to talk to you. Thank you for being with us on Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much.
that is it for another Fireside Chat. But we will be back at the same time next week, and you can catch Planet America Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV and anytime from 9 on ABC iView.
And do not forget to pep the Planet Extra podcast. Will be in all the usual pod places. See you there.
Bye.